This video is brought to you by Brilliant. If you live here in the UK, you'll know about the prevalence of online gambling companies. They pay hefty sums to sponsor some of the largest football teams in the country, and whenever you watch TV, you have to sit through numerous cringe-inducing adverts. This doesn't happen out of nowhere though. Gambling companies have to raise enough money to plaster their adverts everywhere, money that's raised from those that lose bets. So with that in mind, we're going to split this video into 3 parts. First, looking at how the current rules with gambling work, how the rules have changed over time, and ultimately whether there's a case for nationalising it. Dive deeper into politics with our magazine, Too Long. Yes, we made a real physical magazine. Find out more by clicking the link in the description. Now, it's no secret that people here in the UK like a bit of a gamble. The Gambling Commission approximated that, at the start of 2023, around 44% of those surveyed claimed that they'd spent money on any form of gambling. Now, while this has dipped slightly during the pandemic, this figure has remained pretty stable since 2016. The interesting change that we've noticed in gambling has been a huge increase in online gambling. Back in 2016, excluding the National Lottery for reasons we'll get onto later, only around 10% of people said that they'd gambled online. This has nearly doubled in 7 years, reaching almost 18% in 2023. This coincides with a slight decline of in-person gambling, again excluding the National Lottery, with around 25% of adults between 2016 and 2019 claiming to have spent money gambling in person, dropping to only 19% in 2023. The point is that while in-person gambling might have started to decline, bookmakers have been able to make up for this, and then some, with the uptick in online gambling. Between April 2023 and March 2024, the gross gambling yield for all bookmakers in the UK was £15.6 billion, a 3.3% increase from the year prior. In fact, this is nearly 2 times higher than in 2008-2009, when the total gross gambling yield was only £8.4 billion. As you'd expect, a large proportion of the gross gambling yield has come from people starting to gamble online. When we break this £15.6 billion down, we see that around £6.9 billion came from some form of online gambling. In fact, by far the largest revenue stream has been via online casinos, which are operated by these bookmakers and include online slot machines, which had a gambling yield of around £4.3 billion for bookmakers in the UK last year. It's important to note here that this is actually around double the yield of all forms of online betting, for example, football betting and horse racing. In total then, online betting makes up around 44% of the total gambling yield of bookmakers. Back in 2008-2009, this was only 9.75%. Now, this is significant for 2 reasons. First, online slots have fixed odds, which are hugely beneficial to bookmakers, as there's less unpredictability. With horse racing or football, for instance, bookmakers can set odds, but there is at least some degree of unpredictability with both horses and footballers, which means that they can't always be sure that they'll make money. With online slots, though, the odds are fixed and the house has a built-in advantage. Betting shops know exactly how much money they'll make over time. In essence, then, this change has been very good for the bookmakers. Secondly, data from the National Centre for Social Research shows that twice as many online gambling accounts belong to customers in the most deprived areas. And while betting was more popular in terms of the number of people that put money on, it was the online casinos we discussed earlier that lead to a higher probability of incurring heavy losses. In fact, of those that spent the most, a higher proportion of addresses were in the more deprived neighbourhoods. Even more concerningly, the top 10% of gambling accounts, by the amount staked, contributed nearly 79% of all revenue by the bookmaker. So the rise of online gambling has been particularly good for the bookmakers, and bad for those in deprived areas. And as online gambling continues to account for higher and higher proportions of gambling yield for bookmakers, this is only set to get worse. The thing is though, this hasn't always been the case. In fact, it was only in the late 1990s and early 2000s that gambling legislation relaxed significantly, creating the current situation whereby bookmakers can not only make huge profits, but they can entice new customers in with huge amounts of advertising too. Recent research suggests that fans of the Premier League were hit with almost 30,000 adverts on a single weekend. Prior to the changes in the late 1990s, which we'll get onto in a second, bookmakers were allowed to operate and retain profit, but they were not able to actively promote their business. This decision was made in 1960 and was the inverse approach that some countries went with. France, for instance, allowed bookmakers to promote their business, but profits were largely just reinvested in the state. The first big change happened in 1994, when the John Major government introduced the National Lottery. Now, this was interesting, as though it was run by a private operator, the Camelot Group, 28% of revenue was mandated to go to good causes and 12% to the Treasury. While this sounds good on the surface, it made it hard for the government to argue that other gambling companies shouldn't be allowed to advertise. And so, over the next few years, gambling companies lobbied the government and the rules were changed. This, coupled with the rise of the internet and online gambling, has led to the situation we're in today, where gambling companies can raise huge amounts of money, largely off the backs of those in deprived areas, and not have to reinvest all that much back into local communities or the Treasury. Naturally, this has led some to argue that perhaps one way to address this would be to nationalise gambling. As we already explained, the National Lottery is already a chunk of the way there, with it being set up as a state-franchised organisation and with sizable chunks of revenue already being put back into the state and back to communities. Expanding this and going that little bit further towards nationalisation would be a way to ensure that profits made by gambling companies can go towards alleviating problems caused by gambling, whilst also providing the Treasury with more funds. And just to be clear, this isn't a particularly modern idea. It was floated all the way back in 1967, when Illtyd Harrington, who went on to be the deputy leader of the Greater London Council, argued that there should be state-run casinos or municipal gambling for the very reasons we just outlined. That said, making this move would be seriously bold and would upset a powerful financial group in the UK. So don't be expecting Rachel Reeves to announce this policy anytime soon. There's a lot of difficult decisions necessary here, and making huge decisions, especially quickly, is difficult, even for world leaders. The good thing is that Brilliant is where you learn by doing, with thousands of interactive lessons in maths, data, programming, and AI. Their interactive classes help build your critical thinking skills through problem solving, not memorizing. So while you're building real knowledge on specific topics, you'll also be becoming a better thinker. For instance, their Predicting with Probability course can help you better understand and assess the world around you. You can learn to wrangle massive datasets, compare distributions, and master fundamental concepts like Bayes' theorem. That might sound a little technical, but with their active learning, you learn this by answering questions like which airline is least likely to have a delay due to weather, and how much more unruly airline passengers have gotten since the pandemic. Data skills are absolutely necessary for navigating the modern world, and Brilliant is the best way to get them. To try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, visit brilliant.org/TLDR, or click the link in the description. And by doing so, you'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription.